Who lives rent-free in whose head? We finally discuss coming up.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're listening. We appreciate it. It is Tuesday. Connor, we have a kickoff time for Nebraska, Colorado. We've been hinting at this. We've been thinking about it. And then Monday, the news came down. The Week 2 game on September 7th will be played at 6:30 p.m. night game, Saturday Night Football, prime time on NBC, September 7th. This will be the most hyped non-conference game at Nebraska since, what would you say?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because I've come up with a very like an extensive list basically of the last, 20 years or so of Nebraska football.
Nice.
Since is probably 2021 Michigan.
Okay.
But
well, that's any game. I'm talking non-conference game.
Okay, non-conference. All right. Then you have to go back to either 2016 Oregon or 2014 Miami. And I think, this game will resemble the temperature of 2014 Miami the closest. But as we've mentioned before, I mean, it's going to be, if everything kind of goes right, and I would expect there to be, some jawing between the two programs. Maybe if it's not direct, it's indirect a little bit this summer. And Nebraska fans have been emboldened with confidence, and Colorado fans, are still all the way in, I think, on Dion, at least the ones that I have talked to. So yeah, I think it's going to be pretty intense when we get it set up in September. And I think it'll be like, we always use that Miami game in 2014 as a barometer for like the angry games. There was the sign in the student section that said, "Welcome to your worst nightmare," which is a great picture. Like, I think it's going to be better than that. I think it's going to be more angry, and it'll definitely be keyed all the way up on a Saturday night.
My barometer is this. I started to get texts from family yesterday, right as soon as the kickoff time was announced, demanding tickets to that game. and and I don't know. I don't have like the special key to arrive at tickets. I'm not sure why that seems to be misunderstood. It's like, if I talk to some of these people for my job, that doesn't mean that I can say, "Hey, I need 4 in the lower bowl for Week 2." There's not an upper bowl. Well, there's kind of there's an upper deck, I guess.
Upper deck, I suppose. Yeah.
Memorials. Yeah. This is, we've talked when Nebraska's gone to Boulder the last couple of times about how hot the ticket was and how Colorado fans are getting agitated because some Nebraskans are trying to purchase their tickets through whatever method is available. If that means buying season tickets, if it means harassing Colorado faculty, students into selling their tickets, whatever that might be. This is the first one I can remember at Nebraska in a while where it's going to be a truly, truly hot ticket at Memorial Stadium. Now, I mean, look, there have been other games. All of them are sold out, but in reality, they're sold out.
There's varying degrees of how easy it is to get the ticket, right? Like,
this one's going to be tough.
This one will be actually real life hard. Like it'll be like Nebraska volleyball hard. Like, it's hard to get a Nebraska volleyball ticket. That's probably the toughest ticket in town at the moment. But there's 80,000 people that go to these games, and they're not all big games, and you can find them. For this one, it's going to be hard.
Don't come to me for tickets.
Yeah, there's going to be very few people selling, I think, that want to be in that night.
I want to dive into a little bit of that dynamic, and you touched on it, about what the stadium might be like, and we'll talk after the break about how Colorado might handle it. We're going to keep talking about Colorado. So, and you mentioned Miami in 14, and then I want to mix in something that involves the conference game, but not Nebraska's current conference. So the 2010 game against Texas was highly, highly anticipated because in the previous December, Nebraska lost against Texas with the 1 second game. It's the Mac Brown, whatever, getting the second put back on the clock. Colt McCoy and Ndamukong Suh, walk-off field goal, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Texas goes to the national championship. Nebraska, it's all about the BCS and Bo Pelini. And so the Longhorns came to Lincoln the next year, and Nebraska was at that point on the way out of the Big 12. So that game had some serious dislike around it when it came to the opponent.
Well, and I'll add, I think I remember the hype specifically for that. They had a specific branding for it. They called it Red Out Around the World. That was a horrible idea. And they also, part of it was, Nebraska felt like they were ready, right? Nebraska felt like they were good. They were coming off of beating Kansas State on Thursday night. Taylor Martinez had announced himself as like this, Heisman candidate, this, a national type of player, and Texas was down. Texas was not good. They were unranked when they came to Lincoln. Nebraska was number 5 in the country. And it just, the script got completely flipped that day. That's one of my, as a fan, one of the worst memories of going to a game all time, because the hype was just so big. And it was such an important game. It felt like for Nebraska to mentally get over this hump against Texas, but they couldn't do it. And, Taylor he was held to 21 yards rushing in that game, and Garrett Gilbert ran wild. And so there is some PTSD here that is involved. Garrett Gilbert.
What an unmemorable Texas quarterback.
Definitely. Yeah. So there's some PTSD here involved with some of these games where Nebraska's hyped him up. I think like 2019 Ohio State College Game Day came to town. The time College Game Day came to town before that was the USC game in 2007. So yeah, it's been some rough ones when Nebraska has hyped them up, and so I don't know. Hopefully they're over that mental piece of it going into this one.
Nebraska can probably be safe that College Game Day is not coming to town on September 7th, because there is a game. Speaking of Texas, there is a game at the Big House on that day involving Texas, Michigan, the defending national champ, against the returning college football playoff semifinalist. So that one is spoken for, I think, when it comes to the College Game Day caravan. But there's going to be some hype, and it's mainly going to be generated by Nebraska fans. Do you feel like when you look at that Texas game from 2010, in Miami from 2014, there's similarities there? I think it's kind of a mixed bag between like what the vitriol will be and was for those two games, because you've got like the old time rival feel with the Miami connection, and that's Colorado, and then you've got kind of the revenge factor with what happened last year in Boulder, and it's a lot different game than what happened in Nebraska in 2009 in the Big 12 championship. But still, I think these things kind of all come together. Do you think that Colorado in 24 is as intense for Nebraska fans as either of those two games, both of those two games?
That's an interesting way to kind of frame it. Like, it's not like there was this dynamic with Texas where you couldn't beat them, like you just time and time again, you just couldn't beat them. And I guess that's been the case the last 3 times Nebraska's played Colorado. But they don't have this long history of not being enough against Colorado, although they've had some devastating defeats against them. So it combines the brand with, I think, the 3 losses in a row in this series that has restarted since 2018. And then obviously the Coach Prime effect, I think, which we'll get to in a minute here. So it's, that Miami week in 2014, I remember there being a lot of trash talk throughout the week. And so that felt natural. I wonder if something will happen like this, but I imagine as we get closer, it'll be just as an intense of a want to win for Nebraska fans standpoint, like a need to win that football game, because the series ends for now after that game. And, who knows if they're going to see Deion Sanders again. So it might be your last crack at him and a last crack at a rival for a little while now.
They're going to see Deion on their TVs with wherever he is. And I don't, I suspect that it won't be in Boulder, Colorado, but you never know. All of these games that we've talked about, interestingly, Connor, not the Miami game, other than the Miami game, the Michigan game in 21, the Ohio State game with College Game Day, the Texas game in 2010, Oklahoma in 22. These were all Nebraska losses. These were all games that the hype was there, and it didn't happen for Nebraska. Now Miami in 14, Oregon in 16, those were wins. Colorado in 2018 was even a game that had some similar characteristics to this, because that was Scott Frost's first game at Nebraska. Now the hype around the week before, of course, made that such a strange scenario because
of
the thunderstorm. But, Nebraska hasn't always met the challenge in the last decade or so, or has rarely met the challenge in the last 15 years when it's come to these type of hyped games. So that just adds another element to what we're going to see at Memorial Stadium on September 7th. So after the break, we're going to get into a little bit more about this game, specifically as it relates to the Buffs. That's coming up. Stick with us. All right now I want to ask you to please support all of our sponsors. One of those sponsors is LinkedIn. When you are hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. It has all the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just a job board. It helps you hire professionals who you can't find anywhere else, even those who are not actively searching for a job. In a given month, more than 70% of LinkedIn users do not visit other leading job sites, but they are visiting LinkedIn. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. Another number, 86% of small businesses on LinkedIn get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege.
All right, back here with another angle to the Colorado conversation. So let's get this out of the way first, because we every time we talk about Colorado, someone will comment and someone will say, "Why you guys talk about Colorado so much?" This is a Nebraska podcast. It happens on my show. It happens on this pod. It happens when you mention them, Mitch, I'm sure in one of your stories. But my answer to that is because it's fun, and because they're interesting, and because obviously it's relevant to Nebraska because they cross paths in an important early season game this year. So I think it makes a lot of sense to why we would check in with Colorado. It's, I think we've got experience doing that before, where, I don't know, Nebraska's got a big non-conference game with Oregon. Let's check in on Oregon. Let's call the beat writer from Eugene up, and see what's going on. I think there's some precedent for that, but this situation is so, it's a national story what Colorado is trying to do, and what they, even though that hasn't necessarily resulted in success for them, you're trying to figure out how it can and what they might end up being this year. And if it doesn't go their way, then it becomes a story in that it all kind of falls apart. So it's an endlessly interesting story, and obviously it cross paths with Nebraska. That's the best reason that I can come up with.
Yeah. Also, we had Max Olson on last Friday, and we talked about Colorado for a segment. Max is a national writer for The Athletic. My coworker, he covers the Big 12. That's Colorado's conference, by the way, Buffs fans. And and he did an in-depth story on CU's castoffs under Deion Sanders in his first year, the 53 castoffs in his first year on the job. So if you have any interest in that, or if you didn't listen to that show, go check that one out. It was last Friday on the pod. And speaking of that, thank you for downloading and listening to us.
Yeah.
Check us out on YouTube if you're not watching right now. Listen on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music. Send us an email. We got an email. We had an email in the inbox that I found digging through the inbox, Connor. It was from a fan who liked Tony White, was happy that we were talking about Tony White in a previous episode, but didn't understand our optimism because of just how awful this fan believes Marcus Satterfield and others on the staff are. So I don't know.
That's worth a segment one day.
I'm not into that. I'm into the conversation. I'm not necessarily buying into that theory at this point. But yeah, we can certainly talk about that another time. Right now, you can't look away from Colorado. We started the show talking about the Buffs. We're going to continue to do it. We might be obsessed with them, but that's fine. So here's a question. September 7th, kickoff, 6:30. Colorado played last year at Oregon and at Utah. Tough environments, but not 85,000 seat stadiums. They did play in an 85,000 seat stadium, actually a much larger stadium against UCLA in the Rose Bowl, but it was not full. It was like 60% full. So what Colorado, Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter will be walking into on that night? Are they prepared? Do we feel like you can prepare for that by going through the Big 12 or the Pac-12 in a season? And Jackson State has not prepared them for this. So what do we think is the crowd factor potentially in this game if it doesn't start horribly for Nebraska?
Well, I think it could be difference making. They went to, their first game last year, they went to TCU, right? And that's not a huge crowd, a huge atmosphere, but I think they had a thing on their side that day, which was nobody had any idea what was going to happen at all with both of those teams in that game. So that was kind of something they took advantage of the chaos factor. I don't know. They have a few big time players. Obviously, Shedeur Sanders is a big time player, and Travis Hunter is a big time player. And Hunter. Nebraska doesn't really have any skill guys like Hunter, so you tend to kind of think about just the best players in this game and who can kind of dominate when you get into situations like that and when it all breaks down. And I don't know, Colorado might have the advantage in that category. I don't know if they have the depth of advantage, but I don't know. I kind of play it out pragmatically, just like that. But they definitely haven't seen. Very few have, Mitch. Like Nebraska has a good when it wants to, and it's at night, and especially if it's in the early season and it means something. Nebraska has a really great home field advantage. They haven't got to show it very much. I heard Dillon Gabriel talk about this because he played at Oklahoma in 2022, and he made a point of like Nebraska was a scary place to play because you couldn't see out. You felt like you were kind of buried inside, like it was almost claustrophobic that you were just like inside and the people were on top of you, and it was really loud. Obviously, in the first drive or so of that game before it got away from Nebraska in 2022. So I think that's a good point. And Nebraska will be on top of Colorado. The fans will be on top of Colorado as well. So I do think it probably makes a difference in this game. It just depends on where and when.
That's spoken like a quarterback who spent the first several years of his career in the American Athletic Conference.
No doubt. Yeah. It's like, whoa, look at what's going on out there. No, you don't get that so much in the Big Ten.
And there's a little bit of that factor, I think, with Shedeur Sanders. Just in the sense that he has played 1 year in the Power Five, but again, hasn't come across this kind of an environment. I will say, I think that Sanders and Hunter and some others on the CU roster, and this is a strength of Deion Sanders, they will use that. They will find a way to use that that night game, the hatred, all of the energy to their advantage. And it could go to Nebraska's advantage if things start well for Nebraska, but it could also flip. And what happened against Ohio State in 2019, what happened against Oklahoma in 2022 in Lincoln, that was a situation where all of the air went out of the stadium very early because after a series or two, it was clear that there was one team that was dominant. Colorado does not have that kind of a talent edge against Nebraska, despite what happened last year in Boulder. Maybe at a couple positions, like one or two positions, but I think across the board, it's going to be a fairly even game, and maybe even a slight edge for Nebraska, just because of the continuity that Matt Rule has been able to build, especially at both lines of scrimmage. So we'll see. It sets up to be something that's just really, really fun to think about and talk about over the next 4 months. So I'm glad it's at night. I'm glad it's happening. I'm glad they're getting this game before CU and Nebraska go their separate ways and maybe never play again in the non-conference.
Me too. What an odd time. The perfect time to do it too. My hope is that, and I don't think Nebraska will, but I hope Nebraska steers into, remember the pregame conversation last year with Colorado. Hey, it's personal. I hope Nebraska takes it a little personal. I like, they got kind of punked on their field last year, and it got away from them pretty bad. Obviously, they feel like they have the solutions to kind of fix what went wrong for them in that game, aka dropping the ball on the ground constantly. But like, I hope they take it a little personal. I think maybe the edge of the crowd might feed into that a little bit. So I'll be curious to see how Nebraska approaches it. They go with the nameless, faceless, like, hey, every game's a game thing. But I'm curious to see what special comes out for Colorado.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. After the break, we're going to dive into Nebraska's special teams, talk about some concerns that I noticed from Nebraska fans this week in putting together my mailbag on The Athletic that has published today. But first, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Do you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for your TV to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, final segment of the show. If you're watching on YouTube, we're sorry about that. I've got a mailbag, as I mentioned, coming out on Tuesday on The Athletic. Lots of questions about the quarterbacks, Heinrich Haarberg's role in the offense. Should he be Taysom Hill? Should Nebraska take a quarterback out of the transfer portal? Advise you to go check that out. I'll have part 2 of that mailbag. Wow, part 2. Lots of questions out on Wednesday. Going to go more big picture, some questions about Troy Dannon that I need to get to, NIL. What struck me, Connor, in going through this first set of questions was the amount of hand-wringing and worry that Nebraska fans, or at least readers of The Athletic who are Nebraska fans, had about the kicking game. I had numerous questions about what people saw in the spring game out of Tristan Alvano. And I got the sense that it was kind of Brian Buschini too. Like, people feel like there's more there with both of Nebraska's kickers at the specialist spot. So should we be concerned about Nebraska's special teams holding the Huskers back in 2024?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't think it's, Nebraska's going to be in some close games. That's how Matt Rule has always sort of put it. They want to get to the fourth quarter, and punts can make a difference, and making field goals when or trusting something as simple as trusting your field goal kicker when you get inside the 30-yard line, like that can make a difference. Now Nebraska has a more of an equalizer, eraser kind of guy at quarterback this year. So that will obviously help them out. But if you can't depend on your kicker to make field goals in Big Ten games, then that does become a problem. I don't know that it costs, like, if you do the overall analysis of the season, how many wins does it cost them or anything like that. I don't know that it directly costs them anything, but maybe it's the idea in the back of your head, or maybe you miss an important one from here or there. But I do think Nebraska just played the spring game, and it was the quarterback checked out, right? The offense looked pretty good. The skill guys look pretty good. You're not worried about the defense. And so you're trying to find something to be really concerned about. And that was the thing that definitely popped out from the spring game. And it piggybacks off of last year too, with Alvano's struggles. So I don't blame people for being a little, tied into a knot about this thing. I think it is important.
Yeah, sometimes the most recent impression makes looms large in your mind as a sports fan. And we saw Tristan Alvano miss a couple of field goals at the end of the first half in that spring game, and then he hit one from the 40-yard range in the second half when we were kind of into like running clock, and the walk-on quarterbacks had taken over charge of the offense. So somehow that meant less for the kicker too. And I'm not in panic mode. I'm not overly worried. I like primarily what I heard about Tristan Alvano through this offseason, that he's gained more consistency, which was his big issue as a true freshman kicker, just being able to get set up to make all the kicks. Like it's like a pitcher who needs to learn to repeat his delivery. That's what it was with Alvano on his approach and his follow through and his steps and everything. And he'd been working with Chris Brown, who, they have connections through Omaha West Side, and Brown, former Nebraska great, longtime NFL kicker, I think has a lot to add there in that work with Tristan. So I think he's going into his sophomore year, and he made 9 out of 15 field goals last year, which isn't bad for a true freshman. Hit a 55-yarder to show his leg strength. We saw what he did in high school. I think he's going to be okay. I'm not getting bent out of shape about missing 2 field goals in the spring game.
And Nebraska's really used to having really great kickers, though. Not so much in the last
historically, yes.
Yeah, not so much in the last like 5 to 10 years, but more so before that. I mean, it was never really a problem for anybody up until, I don't know, Drew Brown left. That was kind of it. It was never really an issue. Maybe a year or two here or there. So I think people are used to having some sort of kind of standard there, and they thought they had a guy with Alvano, who made the kick in the state championship game, and the story's a really good one. And he's obviously super talented. I'm not particularly like, throwing up the red flags or turning on the sirens yet, but it's definitely something that could be an issue for Nebraska. I don't know what you do about it. Like, what do you? Other than ask him to, hopefully he gets better. Hopefully he makes some, you can go out to the transfer portal, but I don't know that your solutions are easily fixed there either. I mean, so I don't know what you do about it. You just kind of have to hope that it works out.
Good shout out to Drew Brown, by the way.
Thank
brother
you.
Of Chris Brown. Everything used to be really good for Nebraska, Connor, and then has kind of taken a dip in a certain direction over the last decade plus. Nebraska fans, though, I think when it comes to special teams, they need to calm down. That's what needs to happen here. So, based on my observations of what was said in these questions that I received, the other final point to this that I'd like to make is that Nebraska's bringing in competition for both Tristan Alvano and Brian Buschini. Kicker Nico Automanelli out of New Jersey is on his way to Nebraska. We'll be here with the summer reporting players on June 1st. And same thing with Camden Cook, the son of former Nebraska punting great, longtime NFL punter Sam Cook. Camden is a recruit in this class, and he's coming in to give Brian Buschini a run for his money. So both of these specialists are going to have competition in August, and that can only be a good thing.
You remember the year when Nebraska had like a soccer player kick a winning field goal?
I do.
Yeah. what was that? 2019?
19. And it wasn't just that. It was like numerous backup kickers got opportunities.
I'm pretty sure they had 7 people kick a field goal that year. I'm not exaggerating. I think it was that many.
It was like injury after injury involving kickers, which just shouldn't. It's just mind blowing that happened, but it did, and we could.
There's
do
some
another
PTSD going on. I think, people are like, oh boy, we can't have the guy who works at Lead Belly doing kickoffs for us anymore, because that was a part of that year as well. So, it's there's a lot going on in that dynamic, but I think they'll be okay.
With that, I think we should wrap it up. We'll be back on Wednesday to discuss more about Nebraska football, get you through the week, get closer to previewing that Nebraska baseball series, the regular season finale at Michigan State. That starts on Thursday. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available free on the Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app.